They called me redundant overhead. But when I walked out of the company, they didn't realize I had just pulled the entire power cord from the socket. And on Monday morning, the whole system crashed, all because of someone they deemed surplus. My name is Rebecca Morgan. Beck, to everyone who knows me. At 39, I'd spent nearly a decade at Northbridge Synthetics, a biotech firm nestled in the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The Rocky Mountains made for a picturesque backdrop through my office window, a view I'd grown accustomed to while building what I considered a respectable career. Most people's eyes glazed over when I told them I was a compliance oversight specialist. It wasn't glamorous, didn't make for exciting conversation at dinner parties, and certainly wasn't the kind of job that had recruiters banging down my door. But it was important, critical actually, though this fact seemed to escape the notice of most of my colleagues. The regulatory guru, some called me. Others preferred the walking encyclopedia of certifications and legal procedures. I kept track of every license, every permit, every regulatory approval that allowed Northbridge to function as a legitimate business in the highly regulated world of medical synthetics. Our company specialized in creating artificial tissue for research purposes, not quite as regulated as implantable medical devices, but close. My office was small but meticulously organized. 3 monitors displayed different compliance dashboards, each tracking various certifications and their expiration dates. Color-coded folders lined my shelves, organized by regulatory body, FDA in blue, EPA in green, state regulators in yellow, international authorities in red. Between these folders sat thick binders containing the documented history of our compliance efforts. 10 years of careful work. What most people at Northbridge didn't understand, including, apparently, upper management, was that our federal operating license was tied to my name. Not the company's name, not the CEO's name, mine. This wasn't unusual in highly regulated industries. The government wanted a specific individual to hold accountability. I was that person. This arrangement had never bothered me. In fact, I took pride in it. While the researchers in the labs created our products and the sales team sold them, I was the quiet guardian who ensured we could legally do business at all. Without those licenses, Northbridge would simply cease to exist as a functional entity. Monday mornings at Northbridge typically started with department meetings. I would brief my small team, just 2 junior compliance specialists and an intern, about the week's priorities, which certifications needed renewal, which inspections were coming up, which regulatory changes we needed to address. They were good kids, eager but inexperienced. I tried to mentor them properly, knowing that compliance wasn't something you could learn from textbooks alone. That particular Monday began like any other, until our department director, Marcus, stopped by my office with an unusual expression, a mixture of discomfort and forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on edge. "Beck, there's a company-wide meeting at 10. Everyone's required to attend," he said, hovering in my doorway rather than taking a seat as he normally would. "What's it about?" I asked, already sensing something was off. Marcus shifted his weight. "New consultant, some efficiency expert the board brought in." I nodded slowly. "All right. I'll be there." After he left, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. In my experience, efficiency experts were rarely good news for middle managers like me. Still, I'd survived corporate reshuffles before. I closed the regulation amendment I was reviewing and headed to the conference room. The meeting room was already packed when I arrived, the atmosphere tense with whispered conversations. I took a seat toward the back, nodding to a few colleagues. Our CEO, Alan Mercer, stood at the front looking uncharacteristically nervous. Beside him was a younger man in an impeccably tailored blazer, his dark hair styled with precision, his smile practiced and cold. "Good morning, everyone," Alan began. "I'd like to introduce Connor Slate from Optimum Business Solutions. The board has brought him in as a process optimization specialist to help us streamline our operations and maximize our efficiency. I'll let him explain more." Connor stepped forward with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how important he was, or at least believed himself to be. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he surveyed the room. "Thank you, Alan. I'm excited to work with all of you to unlock Northbridge's full potential. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. In today's competitive market, companies must continually evolve to stay relevant. My job is to identify areas where we can compress operational layers, synergize vertical assets, and eliminate redundant roles. My jaw clenched at the corporate jargon. In my experience, people who spoke like this rarely understood the actual work being done by the people they were evaluating. As Connor continued his presentation, filled with colorful charts showing how much leaner and meaner Northbridge would become under his guidance, I noticed his gaze stop on me momentarily. Something in that look, calculating, dismissive, sent a chill through me. After the meeting, I returned to my office and pulled up Connor's LinkedIn profile. Harvard Business School, previous optimization work at 3 pharmaceutical companies, glowing recommendations from board members. Nothing in his background suggested any knowledge of regulatory compliance in biotech. That afternoon, I received an email notification that Connor had scheduled a role assessment interview with me for the following day. I forwarded the invitation to Marcus, asking if he would be attending as well. His response came quickly. Connor wants these to be one-on-one, don't worry, just standard procedure. The next day, Connor arrived at my office precisely on schedule, notepad in hand. He declined my offer of coffee and got straight to business. So, Rebecca. Beck, I corrected automatically. Beck. He amended with a tight smile. Tell me about your role here at Northbridge. I explained my responsibilities. Maintaining our federal operating license, ensuring compliance with FDA regulations, overseeing quality assurance protocols, and managing our relationships with regulatory bodies. Connor took minimal notes, his expression suggesting he found the whole conversation tedious. When I mentioned the critical importance of our federal operating license, he interrupted. Yes, paperwork, very important. But in today's digital environment, couldn't much of this be automated or outsourced? Some aspects could be, I acknowledged. But regulatory compliance in biotech requires specialized knowledge and… Of course, he cut me off again. But specialized doesn't necessarily mean complicated, does it? I mean, once systems are in place, maintaining them should be fairly straightforward. I felt my face flush. Actually, regulations change constantly. Each change requires careful interpretation and… Let's talk about your team, Connor interjected. 3 people reporting to you for what is essentially administrative work seems rather robust. The interview continued for 20 painful minutes. Connor asked nothing about the specific licenses we held, the renewal processes, or the consequences of non-compliance. Instead, he focused on how many hours each task took and whether I could quantify the value added of my role. As he stood to leave, he offered another practiced smile. Thanks for your time, Beck. I'm meeting with all department heads this week. Then I'll be presenting my recommendations to the board next Friday. After he left, I sat in silence for several minutes. Then I opened my email and began documenting everything about our licensing situation, just in case. The next few weeks brought subtle but troubling changes. I noticed my access to certain systems was quietly restricted. Emails about departmental decisions arrived in my inbox after the fact, rather than including me in the discussion. Meeting invitations dwindled. My requests for updates on Connor's assessment were met with vague reassurances from Marcus that everything was fine. Then came the first direct hit. I was called to HR and informed that my team was being temporarily reassigned to other departments for cross-training purposes. My 2 specialists were moved to data entry, and my intern was sent to assist the marketing department. I was told to focus on documentation organization, essentially filing old paperwork. This is ridiculous, I protested to Marcus afterward. The FDA audit is coming up in 2 months. We need to be preparing now. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Connor thinks we can streamline the audit preparation process. He's assigned some of the tasks to the IT department and some to the lab assistants. The lab assistants? They don't know the first thing about regulatory compliance. They've been given templates to follow, Marcus said, not meeting my eyes. Connor says it's more efficient to distribute the workload. That night, I stayed late at the office. With everyone gone, I began a systematic backup of every license, contract, and certification deadline, 43 different permits, all tied to my biometric ID in the federal system. I printed out key documents, including the often overlooked Clause 12.b in my employment contract. In the event of termination, all company-sponsored licenses and certifications will be revoked within 48 hours. This clause was standard but rarely enforced. It existed primarily to prevent former employees from claiming professional credentials they no longer maintained. In our case, however, it had far more serious implications. If my employment was terminated, Northbridge's operating license would be automatically revoked unless transferred to another qualified individual, a process that typically took weeks, not days. I printed this clause and highlighted it, then sent an email to Marcus, HR, and Alan explaining the situation. The response was a generic, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention." 2 days later, I arrived to find my office had been moved to a small, windowless room near the supply closet. My compliance databases had been migrated to a shared server, and my access level had been downgraded. When I complained to Marcus, he simply said it was part of the space optimization initiative. Over the next few weeks, I watched in horrified fascination as my carefully constructed compliance system was dismantled piece by piece. Connor had assigned critical regulatory tasks to interns who had no idea what they were doing. I overheard one of them refer to EPA compliance as event planning authorization. I sent increasingly urgent emails documenting the problems this would cause, copying Alan and the board each time. The responses grew shorter and less frequent. Finally, Marcus called me into his office. "Beck, I need you to stop sending these emails. You're coming across as resistant to change." "I'm not resistant to change," I argued. "I'm resistant to compliance violations that could shut down the company." Marcus sighed. "Look, Connor has the board's ear right now. His preliminary assessment showed that our administrative overhead is 30% higher than industry standard. He's identified compliance as an area where we can optimize." "You mean cut," I said flatly. "I didn't say that." Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just try to be a team player, okay? Things are changing. We all need to adapt." That weekend, I updated my resume for the first time in years and reached out to a few industry contacts. One name stood out, Julia Arcavius, a former FDA regulator who had started her own compliance consulting firm. We'd worked together during inspections and had developed a mutual respect. I sent her a carefully worded email asking if she had time for coffee. Monday morning, I arrived early to find my keycard access had been further restricted. I could no longer enter the lab areas I was supposedly responsible for certifying. My email showed 3 meeting cancellations and a new calendar invite. Department restructuring discussion at 9 a.m. with Connor, Marcus, and someone from HR. I knew what was coming. The meeting was held in a small conference room. Connor sat with a tablet in front of him, looking bored. Marcus looked miserable. The HR representative, a woman I barely knew named Diane, had a folder of papers ready. "Rebecca," Connor began, not bothering with my preferred name. "As part of our operational streamlining, we've determined that your position is no longer aligned with Northbridge's growth objectives. Not 'you're fired,' not even 'we're letting you go.' Just corporate speak designed to make termination sound like a strategic decision rather than what it was, cutting costs by eliminating people. Your compliance oversight responsibilities will be distributed among existing team members." Connor continued, "Creating a more agile response framework while reducing organizational redundancy." I sat silently, letting him finish his rehearsed speech. When he was done, I turned to Marcus. "Who will hold the federal operating license?" Marcus glanced at Connor, then back to me. "We're working on that transition. In the meantime, operations will continue under the existing framework." I almost laughed. They had no idea. Diane slid the termination papers across the table. We're offering 2 weeks severance, which is generous considering company policy only requires 1 week for your position level. I read through the papers carefully, noting there was no mention of license transfer or compliance handover, just a generic termination agreement with a clause preventing me from disparaging the company. I'd like a printed copy of my complete employment contract, I said. Diane looked surprised. That should be in your personal records. We don't typically provide. It's my right to request it, I interrupted. I'll wait. 20 minutes later, I had the full contract in hand, including clause 12 salves. I signed the termination papers, gathered my few personal belongings, and was escorted out by security, a final indignity that seemed unnecessary given my decade of service. As I drove home, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. Anger, hurt, anxiety about the future, but also a strange sense of anticipation. They really had no idea what they'd just done. That evening, I received an automated email from the Federal Registry of Biomedical Operators. Notice of license revocation. All federal operating permits under the name Rebecca A. Morgan have been revoked effective immediately per termination clause 12b of employment contract with Northbridge Synthetics LLC. I forwarded this email to Marcus, Alan, and the board chair with a simple note. For your records. Then I turned off my phone and opened a bottle of wine. The next morning, I slept in for the first time in years. Around 10 a.m., I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and 35 emails, all from Northbridge. I ignored them and made breakfast. At Northbridge, chaos had erupted. The automated compliance systems had gone into full lockdown at midnight. Every dashboard showed red alerts. Vendors couldn't deliver supplies because the company no longer had a valid operating license. The internal production system had automatically halted. The API connection to regulatory agencies was returning critical errors. Connor had arrived to find Alan shouting into his phone while lab directors hovered anxiously in his office doorway. What do you mean we can't operate? Alan was yelling. We're a $50 million company. We can't just shut down because of some paperwork. But they could, and they had. Without valid licensing, Northbridge wasn't legally permitted to create, store, or ship synthetic biomaterials. Every aspect of the business that touched their actual products was now in violation of federal law. Alan turned to Connor, his face red with fury. You fired the only person who held our federal operating license. Connor paled. I was told compliance could be distributed among existing staff. Not the actual license, you idiot. That was in Beck's name personally. Didn't anyone read her emails? As it turned out, no one had, or at least, no one had understood the implications. Connor had dismissed her warnings as the typical protest of someone trying to protect their job. Marcus had been too afraid of contradicting Connor to speak up. HR had never bothered to understand the regulatory requirements of the business. A junior compliance specialist who had been assigned to marketing spoke up timidly. Beck tried to tell everyone. She sent at least 6 emails explaining that the license was in her name and would need to be transferred before any staffing changes. She even highlighted the termination clause. Alan rubbed his temples. Why didn't you say something? The young man looked down. I did. To Mr. Slate. He said Beck was being territorial and that anyone could handle paperwork. Connor's face flushed. This is ridiculous. It's just a license. We can get it transferred. The lab director shook her head. Federal licenses for synthetic biomaterials require an approved compliance officer with at least 5 years of industry experience, plus specific certifications. The transfer process takes a minimum of 30 days with expedited processing. 30 days? Alan looked horrified. We can't be shut down for 30 days. We'll lose millions. And that's assuming we have someone qualified to transfer it to, the lab director added. With Beck gone, I don't think we do. The day descended further into panic. Alan tried calling me repeatedly, each voicemail more desperate than the last. The board chair demanded an emergency meeting. the legal department discovered that operating without a valid license could result in fines of up to $100,000 per day. By afternoon, reality had fully set in. Northbridge was effectively paralyzed, and I was the only one who could fix it. At 5 p.m., I finally checked my emails. Among the increasingly frantic messages from various Northbridge employees was one from Alan with the subject line, "Urgent Reinstatement Proposal." The email offered to bring me back as a senior compliance consultant on a 6-month contract at double my previous salary. I would be given full autonomy over compliance matters and would report directly to Alan. In exchange, I would need to sign an NDA agreeing never to discuss the circumstances of my termination or the subsequent licensing issue. I let the email sit unanswered overnight. The next morning, I met Julia Arcavius for coffee. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on uncompromising regulatory standards. "I heard Northbridge is having some compliance troubles," she said, stirring her latte. "News traveled fast in our industry." "You could say that." "Let me guess, Connor Slate happened?" I raised an eyebrow. "You know him?" Julia's smile was grim. "He optimized Meridian Pharmaceuticals last year, fired their entire quality assurance department. 3 months later, they had a contamination issue that cost them $8 million in recalled products." She shook her head. "These cost-cutters never understand regulatory work. They see it as administrative overhead rather than essential protection." "Well, Northbridge is learning that lesson the hard way," I said. Julia studied me for a moment. "I'm expanding Arcavius Compliance Labs, looking for a director of regulatory strategy, someone who understands both the technical requirements and the business implications." She slid a business card across the table. "The position comes with equity. I believe compliance professionals should share in the value they create, not just be seen as cost centers." I looked at the card, then back at Julia. "I might know someone perfect for that role." 3 days after receiving Alan's reinstatement offer, I finally responded. My email was brief. "I don't rebuild houses after they've been burned down, especially when you were the ones who lit the match." I attached the license revocation notice and a screenshot of the compliance dashboard showing the disabled status of all Northbridge's operating permits. Within an hour, Alan called. I let it go to voicemail. "Beck, please." His message began, desperation evident in his voice. "The board is threatening to remove me. We're bleeding money every day. Our clients are starting to look elsewhere. Connor has been reassigned. We'll give you whatever you want. Name your price, your title, your reporting structure. Just please help us get back online." I didn't call back. The next day, legal documents arrived via courier. A proposed consulting agreement offering $350,000 for 6 months' work, along with a written apology from the board. I left these unopened on my kitchen counter. Instead, I signed Julia's employment contract, accepting the role of Director of Regulatory Strategy at Arcavius Compliance Labs. The position came with a substantial base salary, performance bonuses, and a 5% equity stake in the growing firm. More importantly, it came with respect for my expertise, my experience, and the critical nature of compliance work. 3 weeks after my termination from Northbridge, I updated my LinkedIn profile. Within hours, the industry was buzzing with the news. Former colleagues sent congratulatory messages, several explicitly mentioning Northbridge's ongoing compliance disaster. The same week, Arcavius Compliance Labs announced it had secured 2 major contracts, both with companies that had previously been Northbridge's flagship clients. Business journals described it as a strategic migration of clients seeking stable regulatory partnerships. Northbridge continued its downward spiral. The FDA, alerted to the lapse in proper licensing, initiated an investigation. Preliminary fines exceeded $500,000. The company's stock dropped 30%. Clients began canceling contracts, unwilling to risk their own regulatory standing by working with a non-compliant supplier. Connor was demoted to Special Assistant without login credentials. His desk relocated to a corner near the supply room, the same space where I'd been exiled before my termination. Rumor had it he spent his days organizing office supplies. The board unwilling to fire him outright for fear of admitting their mistake in hiring him. Marcus resigned, accepting a position at a smaller biotech firm. He sent me a message apologizing for not standing up for me or the compliance department. I appreciated the gesture, but didn't respond. 2 months after my departure, Northbridge finally managed to get a provisional operating license, a temporary permit that allowed limited production under strict oversight. By then, the damage was extensive. Lost clients, regulatory penalties, and a severely damaged reputation in an industry where trust was everything. Meanwhile, at Arcavius, I built a compliance team based on principles of proactive risk management rather than mere paperwork processing. We developed software tools that made compliance more efficient without compromising its effectiveness. Our client list grew steadily, including several companies that had witnessed Northbridge's meltdown and wanted to ensure they never faced similar problems. 6 months after my termination, I sat in my glass-walled office at Arcavius, sipping an espresso while reviewing our newest clients' regulatory needs. My computer displayed a dashboard of all our clients' compliance statuses, every indicator glowing a healthy green. Affixed to the edge of my monitor was a small yellow sticky note, placed just beside my webcam. It contained a simple reminder, both for myself and for the industry I served. In case they forget, I was the license. The medical synthetics industry had learned an expensive lesson. Compliance wasn't just administrative overhead, it was the foundation that made everything else possible. And the people who maintained that foundation weren't redundant. They were essential. As for me, I'd found my true value. Not as a cost to be cut, but as an asset to be valued. Sometimes being let go is the push you need to find where you truly belong. And sometimes those who deem you redundant discover just how necessary you really were, usually around the time everything stops working.